Now, I would like to focus on the life of William Shakespeare, the great poet and dramatist, and one of the best loved personalities of the English people. Um, there are actually quite a lot of gaps in Shakespeare's biography. There are some facts that we don't know for sure and will probably never find out for sure. That's because no biography of Shakespeare was written during his lifetime or for 93 years after his death. And but patient research by certain scholars has uncovered a good deal of his biography. So we know that William Shakespeare was born on the 23rd of April 1564 in a small town called Stratford-on-Avon or Stratford-upon-Avon. William Shakespeare's father, called John Shakespeare, was a farmer's son, and he came to Stratford to start a business and became quite prosperous. But we know that John Shakespeare was not particularly educated. He was actually illiterate, and when he had to sign some papers, he couldn't even put down his own name, but he had to put a cross well, next to his name instead. And William Shakespeare's mother, called Mary Arden, was a farmer's daughter too, so she was not particularly educated either, but she was really close to her son. Both of them were of free and open nature, and she taught him a good deal. John Shakespeare and Mary Arden had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, and William Shakespeare was the third child in the family, but 2 of the eldest daughters died at an early age, so William Shakespeare was the eldest of the surviving children in the family. We don't know much about Shakespeare's education, but we can suppose that he went to the local grammar school, and there he studied Latin, Greek, arithmetic, and a few other subjects. But probably a more important kind of education he received out of school. It was important for him to be around people, to observe their behavior and their psychology, and also to explore the surroundings of Stratford. And actually, Stratford was a perfect place for that. It was a charming little town in the very center of England. Nearby at hand was a forest famous for the beauty of its nature, as well as some old castles and the old Roman camps and military roads. So William Shakespeare was allowed to explore all of those as a child, and the beauty of the place must have influenced his imagination powerfully. And in this picture you can see the house where he was born. It's kept as a memorial called Shakespeare's birthplace. And this is a map of Stratford-upon-Avon. But things changed for the family when William Shakespeare was about 14 years old. His father lost all of his property and fell into debt, so the boy had to leave school because the family couldn't afford to pay for the classes anymore. But instead, William Shakespeare started to take private classes. He was taught by an Italian who was probably his father's business partner or assistant. And this Italian taught William the Italian language, brushed up his Latin, and together they studied the poetry of many Latin, Greek, and Italian authors. They analyzed the poems and they translated them from language to language, and they investigated all the literary forms and stylistic devices which certainly helped the poet in the future. And William started writing his first poems when he was still a boy, but that was not really a sign of a genius, because in those days that was quite quite a usual thing. Many people wrote poems at an early age as well, but not many of them were as talented as Shakespeare. William Shakespeare also got acquainted with his future wife, called Anne Hathaway, at quite an early age. Anne Hathaway came from a well-to-do family of a farmer. And William and Anne got married when he was only 18, and soon they had 3 children. Their eldest daughter was called Susanna, and then they had the twins called Judith and Hamnet. Um, and well, but it turned out that William Shakespeare was not much of a family man, and he soon left Stratford-upon-Avon without looking back and started for London. When he came to London, he was doing some odd jobs for some time. For example, it's known that he worked at the stables for a certain bit of time, but he knew that he wanted to turn to the stage. He wanted to be an actor because drama was gaining popularity very rapidly thanks to the work of the university wits. So quite soon Shakespeare became an actor and then a play patcher. The word patcher goes back to the verb to patch, which means накладывать заплатку. So as a play patcher, William Shakespeare was supposed to improve the already existing dramas. So he altered them, he modified the plot and the characters and the wording sometimes to make those plays more appealing to the audience. Thanks to that, he gained a practical knowledge of the art of playwriting, and soon he started to write plays of his own, first comedies and then historical plays. And new plays by William Shakespeare appeared almost every year between 1590 and 1612, in some years one play and more often two. So if you do the maths, the number is quite impressive. In the year 1593 and probably 1594, William Shakespeare published 2 long poems called narrative poems because they present narration. The titles of those poems were Venus and Adonis and Lucrece. As you can guess, both of them were based on some ancient plots and retold ancient myths. But the genre was quite unusual, and that's why they're worth mentioning. Also, we should mention that in those days, the whole theatre business worked in a bit a different way. So the playwright who created plays, worked for one particular company of actors and for one particular theatre, typically. And the theatre became the owner of the plays. William Shakespeare was a part of a company of actors too. He belonged to Lord Chamberlain's company of actors, and that means that Lord Chamberlain was their patron. He was an aristocrat and he could help this company of actors financially, or if they just needed protection in case of some problems. Well, in this group of actors, Shakespeare was both a playwright and an actor, so he wrote plays and he also performed parts in them. And he was really successful in both. He started to become very popular. Actors and writers respected him highly and admired his genius, and the common people liked him a lot, and soon the aristocracy got to his plays as well. And they say that even Queen Elizabeth wanted to see a play by Shakespeare from time to time, but the Queen wouldn't go to the theatre then. She would just order a performance at court, so she would invite the company of actors to come to the palace. Well, the first plays that Shakespeare created were performed in some of the oldest playhouses like the Theatre and the Curtain, but then Lord Chamberlain's company of actors saved enough to build their own theatre called the Globe, and most of Shakespeare's greatest plays were performed there, and actually all of his plays, but for the earliest ones, were performed there. And by the end of his literary career, Shakespeare was acknowledged to be the greatest of English dramatists. He had no equals, and his financial position had improved greatly as well. We can say so because he was a shareholder at the Globe Theatre. That means that he owned a part of the theatre, владелец части акций, совладелец театра. So that means that whenever the Globe received profit, Shakespeare received a part of that money as well. And he used that money to purchase property both in London and in Stratford-upon-Avon. But the years which brought immense prosperity to him also brought sorrows. He lost his only son Hamnet in his childhood, and he also lost his brother and parents. Many scholars actually believe that he grieved over his only son Hamnet, and that probably one of his best-known characters, called Hamlet, was created to commemorate the boy in the memory of Hamnet, because the names are really very similar. We can also suppose that in this time, Shakespeare, in this period of time, Shakespeare didn't get any close friends, any people he could rely on. So because of that, he must have felt very lonely in London, and because of that, in the year 1612, he left London and returned to Stratford-upon-Avon for good. He also gave up writing. He didn't write anything else after 1612, and he spent the last years of his life in Stratford. He died on the 23rd of April 1616, which was the same day that he was born on. And Shakespeare was buried in his native town called Stratford-on-Avon. There were some plans of moving his remains to London, to Westminster Abbey, but then they looked closer at his will and at some of his poetry too, and there it was stated very clearly that he wanted to remain in Stratford-on-Avon. So instead, just a statue of William Shakespeare was created in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey, and you can see the statue in the screen right now. And also I would just like to mention another curious fact. So the 23rd of April 1616 is the day when two outstanding writers died, actually. Apart from William Shakespeare, that was the Spanish writer Cervantes. He died on the same day exactly, and because of that, in Spain they have a special tradition to celebrate these two geniuses of literature. The 23rd of April is called the Day of the Book and the Flower in Spain, and it is traditional to exchange gifts. People usually give books to each other, and women can also be given flowers. And well, this tradition helps to keep up with the memory of those two outstanding poets.